Okay, and Mark, you missed the introduction round, but if you don't mind, would you introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Sorry I missed that. My name is Mark Nesson. I'm a software architect at Kingland Systems. Been using Terraform for a number of years and started using GitLab kind of last year and been really interested in making good progress with the Terraform provider and using that to help manage our GitLab infrastructure. I don't know what else you guys introduced, so hopefully that's
perfect.
all right.
That's perfect. Yeah. Cool. I actually prepared with a couple of topics to discuss. One would be the 100% coverage or moving to GraphQL. I'm adding it to the docs. Sorry, Nico. Yeah. So what are your ideas around this? Like, I've seen that Patrick, you did a bit of research, or was it you?
Yeah, it was me. Yep. Yeah, so I put the issue link to GitHub there in the notes as well. But so I think, you know, the movement here is we had heard from one of the PMs at GitLab, and apologies, the name is passing my mind right now. But that you know, GraphQL is really the direction that the GitLab is moving for those APIs. And so as a result of that, and we're already seeing features around things like vulnerability management and some of the compliance policies where in order to actually configure those appropriately, we need to be using the GraphQL APIs. So the question is really, what's the strategy here? I think for migrating. Right now we use Go GitLab and primarily, well, we only use the REST APIs to my knowledge. Adam, keep me honest. But I think we need to start implementing some of these GraphQL APIs. And so the question is really, what does that mean? I've kind of asserted in the issue that and I'm a couple days behind on some of the comments here, so I need to read some of the notes that have been added since then. But I've kind of asserted that we need to look at the best way to create our own GraphQL client, because there is no GitLab GraphQL client out there right now. Which means how do we actually store that? So do we create a new project, a new repository, and store it there? Do we try and generate some of the code? And Adam, like you said, you know, even with like Gen client there, we're going to essentially maintain our own copy of the API spec, which I don't really love. So the question here is, what do we do? Because we have to do something, because this is the direction that GitLab is going. What do we do in the most maintainable fashion possible?
Do we have like a resource in mind that we can use as like a candidate that is right now only supported by GitLab?
By GraphQL, you mean?
The scan result policies. It might be a little more complicated, but the scan result policies that are replacing the vulnerability check capability in the merge request approval rules is GraphQL only, I believe.
Yep, and that's the one that I know Mark and I are probably most interested in as the first candidate for this as well, because that's something that we'd love to implement, but we want to get it into the provider before we actually implement it corporately.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few more as well. So there are you asking it, Adam, in order to have an example that we discuss through, or? Yeah,
it helps if you have a concrete example, because I was browsing the APIs a bit. I didn't get too far with that, but it wasn't clear to me how they map to exact resources that we want in the provider. So yeah, if anyone has any ideas for resources in mind.
Let me see while we keep talking if I can find the API reference for it, Adam, and I'll get that into the notes.
I think it's possible that you also find some maybe inconsistencies here and there. I found one recently, which was like we have this version API on the REST endpoints, and version is provided under the metadata on GraphQL, so it's there. But I've talked recently to someone, and I think we'll go to the direction of creating a meta REST and metadata REST endpoint and moving version there. So it will be deprecated at some point, this version API. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there definitely are some inconsistencies between the REST API and the GraphQL API. The vulnerability that I mentioned, or the vulnerability API that I mentioned, the query GraphQL API returns information that the REST Git operation does not. So for example, if you want to write something that automatically resolves vulnerabilities that are not found on the main branch right now, you have to use GraphQL for that. That's not something we would do inside the Terraform provider, but it's just an example of where there's differences between those APIs.
I think the general rule of thumb will be like, I think you have imagined that the GraphQL API will probably be the correct one from now on. Yeah.
Sorry, and it would normally return more info based on how you chain types. It's much easier to add more info with low cost sometimes if performance is taken in consideration. So that's why you will find normally more info on the newer GraphQL endpoint.
Yeah, I think as long as the REST API is not being deprecated and being maintained at least somewhat alongside the GraphQL capability of GitLab, we probably just we can still use both.
I can give more info here because I'm actively participating in the working group that discusses these topics, and the rest will stay for sure. Basically, the decision is that GraphQL will be the primary one. New features might appear first in the GraphQL, and REST is very likely to become a layer on top of GraphQL. But there's no even idea of deprecating the REST API altogether. It's totally out of question.
So with going forward, one of the questions I would say is, so if we're going to roll a client of our own, do we want to, and Sander, who's one of the maintainers in the GitLab library, he mentioned in a ticket that just got closed out that he does not use it anymore, and so he was looking for potential ownership and who's going to maintain it going forward. So Victor, I'm not sure if you know anything about that, but I'd be probably looking at GitLab to own that too. I do. Yeah. Very. Actually, I just had a call with him this Monday, I guess. He would like to give over the ownership. Previously, GitLab said that GitLab doesn't want to own any SDKs. I pinged the product manager who is responsible for the APIs, whether they are open to it. I tried to come up with data as well on how much the Go GitLab client is used around to access APIs and so on, but I failed with that this time. So I don't know if GitLab will be interested or not, but based on discussion, we agreed that there are many other possibilities as well. One is that he might allow us to all all the maintainers on the Terraform provider might become maintainers on the Go GitLab library or something along those lines. He said that he's a bit worried about these things because he tries to be very prudent and so on. But if there's no better option, then he might be open to this as well. So we are not blocked on the Go GitLab library. Yeah, because all the maintainers on the Terraform provider pretty much also do the work down or upstream, I should say, in Go GitLab. So
exactly.
It made sense at that point.
Yeah, he knows a couple of other users as well who use directly, but he expects the biggest user to be the Terraform provider, actually.
Yeah. the one thing with that then is if we start building out the GraphQL clients, do we want to build them alongside? So I imagine we're probably going to encapsulate the mutations and the queries probably inside of a kind of like a, not like one-to-one with the API, almost probably like the REST API Go GitLab library does, but probably group them together to kind of give them like create, read, update, and delete functionality for an entire like resource, so to say. One thing then, do we want to build a GraphQL version of resources alongside their REST version inside of Go GitLab, or do we want to spin off a new repository potentially that's separately maintained? That's GraphQL only, is another thought.
I think having them in the provider code base makes sense because like with GraphQL, the queries you form are very specific. It wouldn't really have much generic purpose outside of the provider, I think.
So just for the provider, okay. Yeah, that seems good to me. I was just thinking about it, if anybody else wanted to use it, even though they'd be very specific to the provider. I'm just wondering if it could be something like the Go GitLab client where somebody could use those to like use that library directly instead of using the provider. Would have been my only thought to keep it separate.
Given that this is a GraphQL approach, there is probably already a way in Go to consume a schema and have it handled on you directly. I'm not sure, but I know that it exists for other languages. But the schema, it's public and it has its rule set around. So I don't know if there's much value to do extra work on this.
So I was trying to find that. I could not find such a method inside Go, Nico. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means I couldn't find it easily.
Yeah, no, I meant a third-party module or something similar. I don't have direct experience. I was just thinking that it's something in another language exists, so I expected it to be there.
Yeah, and I think what we were I was reading through some of the comments since I last looked at the issue, and it looks like we're kind of saying there's a client called Gen Client, GenQlient. I'll put a link in the Zoom meeting here that does essentially that. It uses the introspection queries in GraphQL to help build out some type safety, which allows you to I think to Adam's point, it's like if we have only these specific attributes that we need for the Terraform provider, building those out and customizing those for the GraphQL, it does make sense to have that directly inside the provider. So yeah, I think both ways work.
Okay.
Yeah, the only caveat with that is it'd be I don't know if other languages can do this, if they can like generate the full types based on what you get from those introspection queries. At least with Gen Client, you still have to write your own like wrappers kind of around the queries and mutations in the GraphQL language. So yeah, I don't know if there's a way to like fully generate the types, or because that would be pretty nice. But.
That's Adam, where I was responding to you on the one ticket. I thought it was more that GraphQL is closer to SOAP with WSDLs and things like that, where you can fully forward generate like all your queries and your classes and everything. But that's not I couldn't find anything. If anybody else could find something like that where you can forward generate.
No, I couldn't find that either. That's what I was really hoping we would find, because I was like, well, GraphQL supports introspection, so theoretically speaking, we should be able to hit those introspection endpoints and generate everything. I can't find a way to do that. Hopefully someone else can, because it seems like it's built to do that. So
Agreed.
I'm just thinking what should be our next step here? Like, does anybody want to look more into whether there is a tool that actually gives it to us? Or to me, it seems that there was a huge amount of time spent on finding the right tool, and there is likely no such tool. So is it that we want to get started with something like picking one, like the vulnerability reports or something like that to build it out? So what should be the next step?
Yeah, I think so. I think picking that and just building out a prototype on it makes sense. And honestly, I think we could potentially build out a prototype even without picking a third-party tool and just seeing how bad it would be to do it natively in Go, just to keep our dependencies low. And let's see how bad that is. I've got a couple PRs that I need to finish up before I can take that on. So if somebody hasn't grabbed that in the next week or two, I can grab that one.
Cool. Okay. Any other things to discuss here around the GraphQL area?
I guess just to get people's kind of opinion on this, I think as long as GitLab is going to support REST, I think we should predominantly use REST in the provider because it maps more to like the CRUD operations that you would see in like Terraform. But yeah, for these features that are not going to get into the REST API, I think it makes sense. We need something.
Yeah, for features, and I would also say if there's any extra information that you would get out of the GraphQL endpoint that it wouldn't be in the REST endpoint, that would be another thing where we choose GraphQL over REST if they both existed.
But I agree, Adam. I don't think we should try and big bang and move everything over to GraphQL. For as long as REST works, I think we'd stay with a hybrid approach.
Agreed.
Okay, we can document this as well. So that's a great point. Okay.
Ooh. Okay. Well, I don't know. It's only got 19 stars, which is probably why it never showed up in a search.
Well, and it has failing tests too. So we should probably give it a couple whirls. It's also not been updated in 7 months.
2020, yeah.
True.
Yeah.
And you should open the home
point.
page. Actually, you should open the home page.
Uh-oh, how bad is it?
Oh no.
It's a 404.
Oh no.
Yeah, there is more than one though on the similar track. At least as an inspiration, it may still work, right? Or as a base. This is
it certainly gives us another line of research. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say like this might not be. I'm not sure how how active the maintainers are. Probably not very active, but even to kind of update this a little bit, it might be worth it considering the breadth of depth that the GraphQL API has. Might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, I agree.
This is a front-end engineer bad habits. Like a module exists for everything.
Good. That's great. I guess we have to look into it. So there's not much to be discussed about that right now. There are 2 topics that actually Timo wanted to discuss with all of you here. He cannot join us today. One would be the testing strategy, and the other is the breaking changes. The truth is that I wasn't following any of those threads, so I cannot add more than the titles. I added the testing strategy to doc as a link, so you can open that.
Can you share the link to the doc again? Because I rejoined.
Yeah, sure.
I lost it. Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure what the breaking changes were that Timo was looking at. I am familiar with the testing strategy, though. I can speak to that.
All right, let's speak that first.
Cool.
Could you give a quick intro?
Yeah. Timo and I were discussing kind of over just Discord about our tests and kind of going through them, coming through them a bit. There's a lot of inconsistencies across of them, and some of them have a lot of redundant checks in them that are just kind of confusing. And I think especially for new contributors trying to like find something to base their features off of, to find like a good test to use as a model, it can be kind of difficult. So I was at least hoping to kind of have like a model for what we consider good tests, and maybe point to an existing one in our contributing doc, say, hey, this is kind of how we imagine, you should be testing your new providers. You should have a create, you should have an update. This is the types of checks you need. So that was the idea. I kind of made that a bit more concrete in that issue. It was the RFC testing something. What was it? Testing strategy. Yeah. Kind of some ideas of what we think, like maybe we don't need to do a get on the upstream resource. Maybe we can just rely on the way that the Terraform framework does the import testing as a way to verify that it was created upstream. That's kind of, I think that was the most contentious change, because that would be like the biggest reduction in lines of code out of everything. So I'm not sure if Timo was looking for closure on that. It seemed like we kind of were converging on an agreement on that issue.
Yeah, I guess I sort of viewed this decision as made because we've been executing on it. So unless anyone disagrees.
Yeah, no,
So I
apart
think
from
it'll be
sorry, go ahead.
all right. I think it would be a great idea, because I ran into testing issues were the biggest thing for me as someone that's newer to Go and new to testing Terraform providers or building Terraform providers. That was a hurdle for me. So I think having something consistent is a great idea.
Cool. Yeah, I was just sad, like looking at new contributions with like hundreds of lines of tests. I'm like, you don't need all of that. It's too much.
Yep.
It's fine.
Copy pasta.
Yeah.
So we need to open a
I
new
think-
PR to update the contributing document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what would be really useful as a new contributor, I just had my first contribution last weekend in the Go code base, was actually exactly these things. So tell me that use this resource to copy paste, or to understand what you should
Do we want a bot to do that? Wouldn't be a bad idea to have a bot say, hey, this is your first contribution. Please look at the contributed guidelines specifically and this resource to model what you're doing after for the first contributing, since you mentioned that.
I think that's a good idea.
We do have that like first message welcome comment bot. We just need to add, I guess, to it. It does say to check out the contributing doc. Maybe we could also mention. That's the thing we're missing.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Just came the idea.
Sorry, the thing we're missing is like, what do we currently consider to be our like model resource that we want to use as our style?
But I want to say that the reason why that might not work, Ryan, is that I already contributed to docs. I already contributed to a few other things. So, and I would expect that to happen with most new contributors, that they don't immediately go and start working on a new resource.
Okay.
On the other, and for the same reason, it means that I knew that there is already a contributing MD, and I was checking that out. And there I learned a lot, but in the end, what I had to do, I was looking for a relatively simple, but still relatively recent resource that I can start my work out of, so I don't have to reinvent everything.
Yeah, I get you.
And I guess just updating contributing MD with a reference module that use this, that could be actually enough.
Yeah. Do we have anything then right now? Because then it would be it would just be an update to the contributing MD, or we can take a resource that maybe needs a little polishing and then fix that up first, and then do the contributing MD at the same time, if anything. Because I know at least with a few of the resources we've been following, I think most of these, I think the test main might be the only one construct that we haven't actively started using yet that would need to go into an example.
Yeah, I think we do the test main change. I don't remember who suggested that, but that was a really good idea. And then maybe after that, we update the contributing MD with what we think is the ideal style for that.
Okay.
Is that Patrick? I don't know.
I can try the one that I'm still working on, the pages domain resource, which is pretty minimal in scope, and will likely never grow big. So we can pick that as an example. The code quality is the best I could come up with. but
yeah, for sure.
Okay. So assuming we get past the add to the contributing, have a model example, what do we want to do for, I guess, going through all of the resources and aligning the testing, which is that the issue is about? How do we want to break it up? Individual PRs, we want to have a 1 mega PR that everybody contributes to. Probably not the best idea, but how do we want to approach it?
Yeah, that's right. I was looking at the issue more to just make sure that if I did some refactoring, it wouldn't get like rejected right away, because it is a lot of work, like you said. Maybe we can just post. I think they should be batched in groups. Maybe start with a couple. If anyone's interested in doing that work, maybe just post in the thread like, hey, I'm going to work on these, so we don't like override each other's work, right?
Yeah. Do we want to make like a, I don't even know if would we make a milestone or something and then start attaching PRs to that, and then that would be like the source of truth maybe for who's working on what based off the titles of the PRs or something like that? And also the Discord, like a Discord chat saying that too, but I think like a auto adjusting list sitting somewhere, whether it's a milestone or a tracking ticket with a giant checklist, kind of like is on the front page of the README MD of Go GitLab, for instance, something like that.
I think we have an issue otherwise that has like the checklist format in it around some previous refactoring. Mm-hmm. There might be some overlap here. It's an older ticket.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to open like a separate issue for each resource. That could get a bit noisy. I could add a checklist to the existing issue, maybe with just each resource, and then I can maintain that and check them off as we merge stuff. As long as stuff is mentioning this issue, I should be able to track that.
We'll just attach all the PRs to it. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
One thing going forward, so I have a bit of more of a release engineering background. I'd say, do we want to figure out a custom linting solution potentially as we go forward to make sure that some of these are being met? It'd be a fun thing to do, but it would also yell at you when you were running your your acceptance test to say, hey, this does, or like the linting test and say, hey, you're not following these specific guidelines.
Yeah. I'm for any linting strategy that is, justified and gives you a way to fix your issues instead of just yelling at you. Yeah. I've played a bit with Go analyzers and Go static checks before. I had an old PR to add some like docs checks to it. Since then, we've done automated doc generations. We don't need that, but I could, yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. That was the last thing I had. I actually have to go to a HashiCorp meeting. So it's nice meeting all of you, and I'll talk to you later.
Great meeting you, Ryan.
Bye. Okay. Is there anything else around testing that we can discuss?
I think we kind of covered everything. I'll add a checklist to the issue. I'll probably start on some refactoring to get the existing tests in line. I could also open I'll put a message in the thread if I start working on this, but I could also work on that with the test main idea. That was Patrick. Yeah. Unless you want to do it, you can do it too.
But it's all yours. I'm
right.
I'm trying to get through the 15.0 deprecations, and
Totally.
I've been a little bit busy over the last couple of weeks. So
no worries.
Okay. The final topic we have is around the 15.0 deprecations. Patrick, you might be up to date with that based on your.
Yeah, I think I've got. There's really only one that is going to be a big breaking change for us, which is the project code coverage regex. And I've got a PR open for that right now. I'm getting a weird Go error on it, but that's the last thing that I have to do to merge that PR. The other 15.0 deprecation was just around the GitLab runner API returning stale instead of offline or not connected. I mean, it's just going to show up as a plan change the first time somebody runs in 15.0. So I don't think it's really a big problem for us at all. I'm not sure that there's actually any change we need to make. I was going to mess around with the API a little bit, but it's kind of difficult to do that when the API isn't actually returning that data yet. So I think the big one here is covered. I think what Timo was looking for with the conversation is actually in issue 984. One sec. Added that to the docs real quick, which is what is our official policy on supporting previous releases, right? Which does come into play with the 15.0 breaking changes conversation, right? So it when I did the PR, Timo and I actually had a back and forth in the PR as well about you know, what does it look like to support previous versions? And in this particular case, you know, we're adding, what I ended up doing on the PR was actually not changing anything about the project resource itself, other than adding a deprecation notice on the particular schema. But I had to refactor some of the tests because one of the tests that tested the build coverage needed to have a version application added to it. But I think the question is how long then do we maintain that effectively deprecated code? And the obvious answer to that is until our next major release, right? Until 14.0, right? And so what does our policy look like for major releases, right? Because GitLab seems to do a major release about once a year. I don't know if there's an official policy around that. But, you know, if we target a major release that always trails 3 months after the GitLab major release, we basically give our users like a 3-month upgrade window. And Victor, I think you had shared that most of, like, even the self-hosted GitLab users were on about a quarterly upgrade cycle. So we're sort of aligning to those usage metrics from GitLab then.
Yeah,
so
I would like to ask, what GitLab version do you use? Just to kind of kick off the discussion here.
Well, we're on the SaaS provider, so
okay.
Yep,
always the current one.
Yeah. Others?
I'll go check. I'm not sure. It should be pretty recent. I don't know. There's a team that keeps that pretty up to date.
Yeah, we're on the SaaS version
as well. Okay. Yeah. And then in this case, it won't help us much. Like, what are your preferences? Type of. Actually, GitLab itself supports 3 versions back. So with back, back ports and security fixes, they support up to 3 versions, if I'm not mistaken.
And I'm on 14.8.5, just to answer your question. Yeah, I think 2 main things here. I think 1, we should start to include in our release notes what version we tested against. Just so if anyone's kind of going through and trying to find a version that would work, if they're on like an old version, or if they're about to upgrade to a new minor version of GitLab, they can first check that we've tested against it before they take our version, you know. And then, yeah, we were suggesting, Patrick, to test against like the latest version, and then also the one from 3 months ago.
Yeah, which means we need to probably update our actions pipeline as well, because right now we're literally only testing against the most recent version.
Which is sometimes more recent than is the one on the service. So.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, so we should, what that probably means then is we should pin those Docker image versions as well. We should probably pin them in the Docker compose that we use for even when we're testing in Gitpod. Does anyone know, does Dependabot help if we pin those versions? Is it going to help us keep those versions up to date? Because otherwise we're going to have a PR every single month to update those, right? Which is going to be kind of problematic over time.
I'm not 100% sure, but I know that Dependabot is actually Renovate bot behind the hood. That's the open source
Okay.
project.
So
it might
Renovate
happen,
should.
it might happen that if we add the Renovate JSON to the repo, then it will be picked up automatically. I'm not 100% sure about this, but I know that
It should pick it up. I know it's the Docker image versions.
Yeah.
You know, Mark, since you've used Renovate more than I have, is there a way that we can tell Renovate don't update to the latest version, but update to the N-1 version?
I know you can limit versions to say, you know, don't go to this or keep it within this range. I don't know if you can say kind of that variable N-1. We'd have to dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Do we need to pin versions? I know it's not a huge deal to have to like merge a dependapod MR every now and then, but even if we could avoid it, could we have like the job say, you know, get whatever version is released, get whatever version was current 3 months ago, and then just use those two versions to test against?
I mean, I guess we could write like a bash script to get the current version that's running on SAS and then subtract a couple numbers from it and then use sed to modify the Docker compose file and pull it that way. So basically dynamically pin the version based on what's running. So your current version would always run latest. And then your next version or your previous version would always run latest -1 on the second bullet point. And then we'd only have to merge a change once a year when a breaking change happens, right? A little bit weird because it means that we'd have to add that to the make file and you could no longer run Docker compose up directly. But I mean, our contributing file already says run make test acceptance. So maybe not a big deal. Something's gonna break there. I need to put some thought into that.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Like it might be okay most of the time, just when you're local developing, run against latest. Sorry, it's hard to tell how much of a problem that's going to be.
Yeah.
Can we start small? I mean, pinning by hand.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it's a once a month update. It doesn't seem to be too much. Okay. I'm trying to kind of go through what action items we have around the GraphQL. Then the basic idea now is to ask Nico to teach us how to use Google and then find more of these GraphQL tools. Now we have at least an idea how to get started there. Around testing strategy. Oh, yeah, there's already surface one. We should add to release notes what version we are testing against. And there are many things in the issue, like the going to the test main idea and contribution and the extend. Okay, what else came up? The GraphQL. Yeah, thanks. And then change the testing to include version -3 to pin.
And were we gonna base our support window on the number of minor versions, or was it going to be on a number of months?
I would recommend number of months. If there is a minor version that fixes the API, we can always use it.
Or GitLab's on monthly minor releases, or how does that work? Are those releases scheduled, or?
Yeah, GitLab is a bit more complex than that. So that's the best idea. Yeah, we are on the monthly minor, but sometimes we are already on the next release. So yeah.
But it shouldn't make too much difference if we do like 3 minor versions versus 3 months for our support window. Those are roughly the same.
Sorry, you mean the minor
just
version?
when we're deciding what our oldest version of support is at a given time for the provider.
Oh, 3 minor is, yeah.
3 minor should be roughly 3 months.
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't want to add like responsible people to these action items because this is an open source project, and it doesn't seem to be the right approach. It's more like a summary of where we want to move on, and as anyone's time permits, we can push this forward.
We have an issue on the project around this community hour, right? So we can, are you gonna add the notes there, and then we can add these as actions on the issue there too?
Yeah.
Perfect.
And recording will be there as well.
All right.
Cool. We have 12 more minutes, but if there is nothing more to discuss, I just want to thank you to contributing to the provider and making it better. And actually, one more thing I wanted to share is that I plan to migrate the provider to GitLab in the next quarter, which will mean that it will have way more exposure within GitLab, not necessarily within my team, but within GitLab as a whole. And it will be easier to reach out to PMs, connect to other issues and so on. So it might help our life in general.
I wonder if we should wait then on making the GitHub Actions changes around the minor version support, because we'll have to rewrite the CI/CD in the GitLab CI format. So I don't know if there's, I don't know if there's a lot of benefit in expending the effort there until we do the migration to GitLab then.
Yeah.
Is HashiCorp releasing support for hosting things in the public registry on different places outside of GitHub?
No, they don't. Our idea is to mirror the repo to GitHub for that reason.
Gotcha. All right. I thought that maybe you would strong arm them into doing it finally.
No. Unfortunately not. Okay. And thank you for joining the call, and see you in a month's time, I guess. Yes, it's after KubeCon, so I will be around. Okay.
Everyone,
have a nice
great
rest of
to
the
meet
day.
everyone.
Cool.
Nice meeting you, everyone.
It's good to meet all of you.
Yeah.
Nice
Bye.
meeting you.
Bye.
See ya.